There is nothing more agonizing than being in a narcissistically abusive relationship and feeling the utter confusion about what's real. In this episode, Tara and I delve deeply into our struggle to see through the fog and what helped us get out. And the self-help tip is about the importance of finding a non-biased support person or friend to stand by your side and reflect what actually is going on. By the way, get a free video gift of what we wish we knew then that we now know if you sign up for our newsletter. You can do that at breakingfreewithkerryandtara.substack.com and get your free download today. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience.
And I'm Tara Blair-Ball, a certified relationship coach.
This is a listener-supported podcast. Please consider becoming a supporter of the show for less than a cup of coffee. You can see a link in the show notes below. I don't think I ever felt as in much emotional pain as I did when I was in that narcissistically abusive relationship. There was a point, and it was like it actually started right away. It started right when I discovered that he had cheated, but it worsened. The longer we were in the relationship and the more conflicting information I got, the worse I felt, the more confused I felt. I couldn't determine if I should stay or leave. And that confusion just grew and grew to the point that I was in agony. I had rarely felt so much pain in my life over a decision, and I couldn't make the decision. I felt like if this was a fence, and I grew up on a farm, so fences are real big to me. If I was standing on a fence, I could see both sides, and I could never decide to take a step in one or the other direction. I just sat on top of that fence and then agonized over why I couldn't make a decision and take a step in either direction. Did you do that too? Was this something that happened to you as well?
Throughout the course of that marriage, I dealt with that multiple times, honestly. And what was recommended to me at the time was that I read a book that we've suggested on here before called Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay, by Mira Kirschenbaum. And I remember a couple of years ago, I mentioned that I had read that book a couple times in that previous marriage to someone, and they were like, well, if you're reading that book, then clearly you need to leave. And I wish it had been that clear. What that book talks about is how relationship ambivalence chronically impacts you in a relationship. For me, I couldn't imagine a future with this person, and I also couldn't imagine a future without this person. And I agonized in making the wrong decision. I didn't know what I wanted, to be honest. I knew I needed things to change and wanted things to change. And things became even more painful, absolutely, after I found drugs in my house. That was really the beginning of the end, where everything was more black and white. Like, this cannot continue. This is really bad. Before, it was sort of ambiguous or vague why it was bad. But with the drugs, it is bad. Oxy, bad, But I absolutely struggled with constantly feeling like any decision I made was the wrong decision, and also really struggling with the fact that making no decision was also a kind of decision, because making no decision meant that I stayed in the relationship and this relationship continued, right?
Right.
And so either way, I was stuck.
In fact, I remember working with clients where I would say making no decision is actually making a decision to keep things the same. And yet when I was in that position, I felt like making no decision was the third alternative. I really felt like I was still up on top of that fence. Like, I'm still standing here and I still can see both sides. How is this actually deciding to stay? I felt like I hadn't decided to stay, but I hadn't decided to leave. It was misery. It was misery. When I was in that position, I would latch on to everything in both directions. It wasn't like I was just latching on the good things and saying, see, he's working really hard. He's trying. No, I would latch on the bad things too and say, this is it. I'm out of here. I need to be out of here. And then something would happen that would profoundly move me off that position and increase the confusion. Now I'm realizing, and I think this is something unique to narcissistic abuse, is that narcissists are highly sophisticated at possible threats of rejection and abandonment. And he would sense me starting to move in the direction of, I'm done, I'm out of here. And then he would throw in a really great thing to keep me off balance so that I would go back into that place of indecisiveness. I also think that he didn't want me to decide to stay either. because then that would mean that I was invested in throwing myself into this relationship and being super close. I don't think he wanted to be close to me. So he didn't want me to feel all warm and loving and like I had been with my first husband. I don't think he really wanted that kind of intimacy. But I also think he didn't want me leaving because he didn't want to lose the way in which we were living life. So he wanted me, and I think he kind of participated in help keeping me in this confusion. Now, this is a new thought. I've never had this thought before. So I'm saying it out loud for the first time right now. But I do think there was a part of this that was deliberate, that I was kept off balance deliberately.
I can relate to that a lot in just the impact of the post-abuse love bomb. That was really common in my relationship with my narcissist, how awful, extremely awful abusive behavior followed by flowers and him cleaning the house and him being so sweet. So I would, just like any trauma bond, I have these glimpses of how the relationship could be or what I think the relationship could be. And I think what I struggled with the most was seeing those as those temporary facades that they disguises that the narcissist slips on, instead of that he could choose to be like that all the time. I really struggled with that. I absolutely thought if he could choose to be this man, that would be the man he would be with me. He would show up to be with me. Mm-hmm. But that's not who he could choose to be, because that wasn't truly who he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I interpreted it that those moments, what he would do is he'd take me out shopping. We were spending my money again. I mean, I would know that. I mean, I'd know he was buying me these really expensive purses with my money, but I liked the fact that he was showing attention to me, that we went out for breakfast and then we'd go shopping and then it would be kind of a nice day and it would be sort of fun. I felt I enjoyed that. That was pleasant. Mm-hmm. I felt that what I was seeing was the potential, that this was who he really meant to be, and that the crappy stuff that was happening was just slips, that there was impulsive. He was not himself, and that if we could just get more of his authentic self more consistently, things would be better. I had no idea that. I don't think today, now looking back and having all the perspective that I have, and even me, like approaching it from a clinician, I don't think I ever saw his real self. I think who he actually is somebody I never met. And I know I wouldn't like, because I don't align with his morals and integrity. I think he kept under wraps who he actually was, and that he was curating what I saw. And so I saw what he believed I wanted to see. And that part really is mind-blowing to me. That why would someone expend that kind of energy to do that? I don't get that. That makes no sense to me. But I do think that's what was happening.
That's interesting to me, because I thought, similar to you, I thought his potential, those moments when my narcissist was kind and loving, that was his authentic self that he could get to with more work. I can relate to that. But then I have come to see it the other way around, that his cruel, mean-hearted, mean-spirited, revengeful self was his authentic self, which you saw of your narcissistic ex, but you still don't think that was his true self. You think you had no sign or no view of his true self.
No, I don't think so. No, I think who he truly is, he so rarely reveals. I think it's mostly an interior experience of how he lives with himself. I don't think that I think that person is a really foreign person and would be truly terrifying, would be nightmarish. The permission he gives himself, the places he goes with himself, I think would horrify most people. But I don't think he lets that out to any. I think even the cruelty sometimes was designed. I think he purposefully set that up. I'm thinking, for example, he knew that I had an allergy to soaps. I can't use most soaps. So what I do is I buy nice soaps. I buy the homemade soaps. I can use those. Those don't cause a reaction for me. He ran out of his favorite kind. He had a favorite kind too. He ran out, and I gave him one of my expensive soaps to use until we made it to the store. And I was looking for it back because these weren't cheap and we were living in a place it was hard to buy them. So I had to bring them in from the United States. And I asked him where it went. He goes, when we got the new soap, and let me remind you, it was just a few days. So we're just talking like a week's worth of the soap. It's like, so you wouldn't have hardly used the bar. You probably wouldn't even hardly got the edge off, frankly, Right. He threw it away. He said, I threw that away. I don't like it. It's not the kind of soap I use. I think that was deliberate, that he knew that would hurt. He knew that he was he was being cruel to me, that he wanted me to be upset about that. He wanted me to know how little he thought of me and little that he thought of my things that meant a lot to me. But I don't still think that was a slip of his real self. I think that was a setup. So I think a lot of what I experienced with this person was a setup.
I don't, it's interesting because it really makes me wonder, did I ever know my narcissist? And honestly, I don't know if it really matters at
Maybe
the end
not.
of the day.
Maybe
I don't
not.
know if it truly matters because he's not in my life anymore. Fuck that dude. Fuck your dude.
But even the fact that you and I, just that you said that, does it matter? It matters to the people in this.
Absolutely. It mattered to me.
It mattered to me too.
Yeah.
If someone had said to me, if you'd been in my life at that time, you would have said, Kerry, this isn't who he really is. You deserve so much better. All of this is crap. Why are you still here? I would have looked at you and like, I don't know. And I don't know what to do about it. And then you'd say, you need to get out. And I was like, I don't know if I can. I mean, I had people saying that to me, but I couldn't do anything with it because I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, I can feel it right now. I mean, back in touch with that. The paralysis, the absolute paralysis was so great that I couldn't make any move at all. I have now since been in other relationships, I realized that I have experienced it, but I had never realized that that was something unique that was happening to a certain type of an abusive situation. I didn't know that. I now recognize when I feel that kind of paralysis, I'm in a toxic relationship. This is really dangerous and I'm getting ill. I now know that feeling is a sign that it's a really bad situation, but I didn't know that at the time. But I couldn't make a move. And boy, when I interact with people, they're in the same spot. They can't make a move. And then here's one of the signs now I know that I'm in that bad situation. If I sit and talk to you excessively about the other person, they do this and they said this and then they did this. And I don't know why they did that. If I spend so much mental energy on another person, then that's a clue to me. There's something really wrong with this relationship and that I'm trying to change the person so the relationship feels better.
And I can absolutely relate to feeling paralyzed. And I too had people in my life saying, I need to leave, or telling me what they would do. If I found drugs in my partner's house, I would kick them out. I would blah, 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 And I absolutely too was paralyzed and uncertain. And I became overly reliant on certain people's advice while neglecting others. My ex-husband and I had a couples therapist at the time who told me, I called her up and said, I found drugs in my house. This is what's happening. I'm going to kick him out in our session today. And she said, you have small babies. You have 2 small babies. You need to keep that man in your house. He's not putting it up his nose. He's not driving drunk with the kids. You need to keep him at home. And I just latched on to that advice and was like, this is what I need to do. Because she'd been our couples therapist. We'd been working with her for, I don't know, months, maybe a year at that time. And all these other people in my life who were like, kick him out, kick him out, kick him out. All I heard was, how am I going to handle taking care of 2 tiny babies by myself?
Yeah.
I can't handle that. No one's going to help me. It's just going to be me. I can't handle that. I need to somehow make it work with this man in my house. And this person is giving me advice that goes along with that.
Yeah. Wow.
And she was the worst couples therapist ever. But, I also had a profound fear of my ex-husband killing himself, which was not an unrealistic fear. He had tried to kill himself multiple times. And after I'd found drugs in my house, he actually one day took a gun that we had out with him. Like he had it in its gun case out in our front yard. And I said, where are you going? And he goes, I need to go and you're not going to let me. And I go, you can go if you want. It's your truck. He goes, the truck's in your name. You're going to call the police. And he just started it was totally insane the way he was acting. His truck had been in my name because he had terrible credit. So I had been the one to buy it. But I was like, I'm not saying you can't drive. You can drive, but you need to leave the gun here. And at the time I didn't know why I knew he needed to leave the gun there. but I was very adamant. You need to leave the gun here. That's not okay. You do not leave with the gun. You do not leave with the gun. And he tried to walk down the street with it. And then he came back and he like threw it on the path. And I remember jumping back because I didn't even know if it was loaded. It was it was in a case or anything like that. And I remember him asking him later, what were you going to do with that gun? And he goes, And I go, I know what? What were you going to do with the gun? And he said, I was going to off myself with it. And so I also had that very real fear that if I was to leave this person, that I might effectively be making my children fatherless because his reaction would be that extreme. So that I had so much fear about leaving that relationship that was so intense for multiple reasons that I felt very trapped and stuck.
Yeah, you're making me think about the point at which I broke through it, because I couldn't break through it for a long time. And it's interesting. It was when I had come back because my son was now ill with cancer, and I was now living back in the United States, and then living actually on the floor of their apartment, of the second bedroom. And that's when I discovered that he was not only still talking to other women, but that he'd been talking about the money, that he saw himself trying to get a hold of my money. So I knew it was multiple things that he was after, not just he was a cheater, but he was also scamming me. And it something clicked, and I'm realizing it wasn't just the severity of what I discovered that helped me click out of it, but it was also knowing that I had the support to fall back on. Like you're just saying, you didn't want to like create fatherless kids. That would have been terrible. I didn't want to be left in another country where I didn't know a language enough to do business. I didn't want to be left there on my own trying to navigate it. It was when I got into enough comfort and knew I had familiarity and knew I had enough backup, then I could say, okay, out. Then I'm done. Out. This is okay for me. And I'm thinking that I think that was a pivotal piece for me, that it allowed me to then to get off the top of the fence, that I could then take a step in the direction of me.
Mine was developing a crush on someone. I don't like talking about this because it's bad. But I effectively had an emotional affair on my ex-husband for 8 days. I developed a crush on someone who was that person that I started reaching out to and sharing things with, etc. And until I developed that crush, I still had no idea what to do. I'd even filed for divorce 3 months before, but the day that my ex-husband was served with divorce papers, I found out I was pregnant, and you can't get divorced in the state I was living in until the child is born. And then I miscarried. And a month after that miscarriage, I still was like, I don't have a clue. I don't have a clue. I just know that I don't know who I am anymore. I don't. I was so devastated by that.
Yeah, but maybe it took you knowing that there was hope and that you could have another relationship and that it wasn't all over. And, maybe that's what it took for you to get. I'm not saying do that, and you're not saying doing that, but I do think it's interesting.
Yeah, I really don't recommend it.
No, I don't recommend it either.
From personal experience.
Yeah.
But he wasn't a white knight. Absolutely not. He ended up being a whole other kind of narcissist, and I was so vulnerable that it was very easy to prey upon me at that time, unfortunately. But he was a crowbar, and that's how it felt to me, that I absolutely needed something to literally crowbar myself out of that relationship because I felt so stuck. And that was the first time that I had any kind of strength to leave that.
So I'm looking for the person that writes to us or comments on our stuff, or maybe even writes into this podcast, what could be the crowbar moment for them. Like I said, for me, it was getting into a position of stability and familiarity that I could then take the incredible risk of leaving. For you, it was knowing that love was still possible, you were still desirable, that this was not all that there was. But what else do you think people can do to help get out, to break this?
What I often see is that people think their feelings are going to motivate them. And what you just explained for both of us is it wasn't feelings that motivate us. It was outside action. And that once we had done or followed through with some kind of outside action, then the feelings caught up. And so maybe that might be the note or motivation for that instead of sitting there and thinking maybe my feelings will change, or maybe I'll be more certain, or maybe I'll wake up one day and know whether to leave or stay. Maybe start doing some next right indicated action that will help you be in a stable, secure place to make that decision.
I can also tell you a definite don't watch their behavior for indication to stay or leave, because you're going to continue to get the mixed message. You're going to continue to see both good and the bad. They're very good. Narcissists are very good at keeping us strung along, and they'll continue to breadcrumb us and then hoover us back in. Every time they're like have a radar to know when we're getting ready to leave. And so it can't be that. It can't be that. It has to be something else. That's what trapped me. I kept watching his behavior, assuming there would be enough of a bad thing that I would say, all right, I'm done. I've had it. Or enough of a good thing long enough that I would like, okay, I can relax. We're going to make it. But that just made it worse.
I have a client who's right now going through this, who she's done, some people call it an ick list. With a narcissist, I don't know, asshole. Ick isn't enough. You know what I mean?
Cat list.
Yeah, like she started really documenting the awful things, because I too had selective amnesia. My narcissist would do something kind, and I'd be like, oh, they've always done kind things. He's so wonderful. And then he would do something awful, and I'd be like, where did this come from? I would be surprised every time. So having some kind of record, even of just a list that you can look back and refer to of, yeah, this person's being nice to you right now, but what did they do when you were pregnant with your child? What did you do when you asked for more commitment? What did you do when, who knows, when they didn't support you, or they didn't care for you, or they were unkind? Having record of that and being able to refer back to that to remind yourself. Because when we're in these relationships, it's so easy to forget. That selective amnesia really kept me stuck. Yeah.
Yeah, it did me too. It really did. Yeah, and I not only did I have selective amnesia, I also had selective, I don't know what you want to call it, but selective interpretation. Like for an example, I caught that he was texting somebody and told her what beautiful lips she had. Then the text said, "Who is this?" The person didn't know him. And then he later explained that it was a call that came in on the wrong number, and that he then had this chat with her. Now, this is early in the relationship. Does that sound like somebody who's working a program for sex addiction? And on top of it, it also tells you this person is so willing to act out that he's fishing in any pond, even a wrong number. And if I stand back and you look at it from a realistic standpoint, that's very sick behavior. It's very bizarre behavior. But I wasn't able to see it that way from that perspective, because I didn't want to say to myself, Kerry, you have somebody who's so willing to hook up. He's willing to hook up with a stranger who just happens to call a wrong number. That's a problem. I wasn't willing to see that.
That's that confirmation bias, just that latching on to information that you feel supports your beliefs. I absolutely did that too. I remember my ex-sister-in-law asking me why my ex-husband's eyes were so red. And I was like, oh, it's just allergies. He just really needs to take like some allergy medicine. No, it's because he's like smoking pot. Like, that's why, But I would latch on to whatever information I felt would support my belief, which my belief was absolutely that my ex-husband was a sober, clean man who wouldn't even take Tylenol or ibuprofen when he was in pain.
Yeah. And I bet that's what you told everybody around you. That?
Absolutely.
And isn't that amazing? Yeah. And I would say, oh, he's working the program, although he's answering wrong phone numbers.
Right.
Right. This is a tough topic, but that's what's so awful about narcissistic abuse is the cognitive dissonance is agonizing, and it puts you in the worst spot possible, really worst spot possible.
That conflicting information, or like what we had talked about before, is, this person we don't necessarily know. How on earth could we feel secure in a relationship when we don't even know who we're in a relationship with?
Yeah.
And I absolutely, when I realized that I had been conned, when I absolutely realized I'd been narcissistically abused, that's how it felt for me. that was the shock and shame that came up for me, was who is this person I'm in relationship with? How did I not know? And that's, I think, why the impact of these kinds of discoveries are that much more painful, because there's such a level of deception that's, I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and that's the word
feel comfortable in your own skin.
No, yeah, and that's the word everybody uses. I feel conned.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have been ultimately scammed. And I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I know I was. He scammed me. I was conned, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're good at that. Today's self-help tip is find a unbiased, objective third party that can mirror your situation back to you. As I mentioned during this episode, I had a not good relationship with a couples therapist who I felt was very biased in her opinion and advice giving. And really, to help me better see my situation, I needed someone that was capable of holding a mirror up to my situation and reflecting back to me what they were hearing, so I could see it and process it more realistically. Because when it was just between my ears, it made no sense. I know, Kerry, you experienced the same thing. It just was so insane, and I was so constantly confused. So being able to find someone like that in your life, whoever it might be, that can hold the mirror up to your situation, who doesn't have any skin in the game, who's not going to give you advice or feedback, who can just reflect back to you what they are hearing, can be a valuable tool in helping you get through that cognitive dissonance, that confusion that comes from being uncertain and unclear in these types of relationships. What do you think,
Yeah,
Kerry?
that was pivotal for me too. I agree. I had one person like that in my life at that time, and I'll never forget. He was an older mentor, and he said to me, "It sounds like what you're carrying is a very heavy load. That must be exhausting." And that stuck in my head that he said that he reflected that. And then I developed a friend later on that I could just go and dump all the garbage, and she would listen. And then when I decided to stay, despite saying all this really awful stuff, she never judged me. And those relationships to me were life-saving, because it gave me the validation I needed that something terrible was happening, but it also gave me the permission to make my own way through it, and to know that maybe what would work for me and where I'm at might not be where they are, but they're going to support me. And it gave me the permission to sort of like seek the edges of what I wanted out of a relationship and what I was going to do about this relationship. So I love that advice. I think it's so helpful. Hard to do though. And I think there's some things that I really want to urge people to look for. They can't have skin in the game, really. I mean, this can't be the sister of your narcissist. It can't be, or the best friend. And it needs to have somebody who's not one of those know-it-all advice givers. It can't be somebody who's going to weigh in and judge you for having it. You have to feel super safe with this person. So maybe if you don't have anybody in your life, you may want to look for somebody online to do that, or look for group support to do that. But would you, anything else you would add that's super important to watch out for in this individual?
In my experience, and this isn't true of everybody, I know you were more than likely a fabulous mental health clinician, Kerry, but therapists you're paying too. They have some skin in the game, you know?
Yeah.
So if you're going to your couples therapist for advice, that may not be the person to go to, because they have skin in the game and whether you stay in that relationship or not. So maybe turning or thinking about your individual therapist, or going to see an individual therapist. Also being considerate of if you're going to spiritual or religious advisors, you know, because they may have their own biases or beliefs about leaving relationships or ending marriages or anything like that. But really trying to be choiceful about the selection of that. Ideally, it would be a friend that you could reflect, who could also keep your confidence. I think that's a very important part of the confidence piece, and someone who isn't going to shame you regardless of what choices you make. And some of us, it might be a good friend, it might be a spiritual advisor, or a therapist or a coach. but looking for those specific qualities.
Thank you for joining us today. Have a question or comment? Email us at hello@breakingfreewithkerryandtara.com. If this episode's been helpful, consider becoming a supporter. And if you haven't yet, make sure to follow us at Breaking Free from Narc Abuse on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. We'll see you back here next time.